Hey, history enthusiasts. Today, we are going to explore the incredible journey of James, the brother of Jesus, a man who went from being a skeptic to one of the most influential leaders in the early Christian church. His story is filled with transformation, faith, leadership, and decisions that changed the course of history. Get ready because this is an epic journey that spans centuries and still resonates today. Imagine growing up in the same house as Jesus. You share meals, talk, and closely watch his growth. But here's the turning point. James, the brother of Jesus, didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. That's right. While Jesus was performing miracles, teaching crowds, and claiming to have a divine mission, James and his brothers were skeptical. Mark 3, verse 21. How would it feel to be in Jesus' house, seeing him do all these incredible things, and yet thinking he was completely wrong? What must have gone through James' mind? Did he really think his brother had lost his mind? And that's exactly what happened. At one point in Jesus' life, James and his brothers even thought Jesus had lost his reason. Imagine how hard it must have been for James to accept this idea. After all, how would you react if your brother or sister claimed to be the Son of God? It's a radical shift in perspective. But then, something happens that changes everything. The resurrection of Jesus. After crucifixion, James still had doubts, like many others. But then, suddenly, he sees a resurrected Jesus. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 7. Can you imagine the shock, the amazement, and above all, the sudden revelation that his brother was not out of his mind? He was in fact the Messiah. This moment flipped James' world upside down. From skeptic to believer, from disbeliever to leader, he was radically transformed. No more hesitation or doubt. James was now fully committed. He didn't just believe, he became a foundational stone of the early church in Jerusalem. His conversion wasn't simple, "Oh, now I believe," but a deep transformation that would impact the church for centuries to come. James wasn't just another believer. He became a spiritual leader. Known as James the Just, he stood out for his wisdom, life of prayer, and deep devotion to God. He became the person early Christians sought for guidance. When major issues arose in the church, such as whether Gentiles should follow Jewish laws, it was James who made the crucial decisions. Acts 15. James' wisdom was essential in establishing the church in its early years. But James wasn't only respected by Christians. He was also admired by many Jews, which is impressive considering the political and religious climate of the time. James became a living example of integrity and faith. His life of prayer was so deep that it said his knees became as hardened as a camel's from so much time spent in prayer. His spiritual practice was tireless, making him a unique figure in a time of great divisions. James became a bridge between Jews and Christians. He was a respected figure for both groups. Someone who understood the weight of Jewish traditions but also recognized the revelation of Christ and was willing to lead God's people into the future, a unified church focused on Christ's mission. But James didn't limit himself to leadership in Jerusalem. He also left us a legacy of wisdom in his letters. The book of James is a practical and direct masterpiece on how to live out the faith. James was clear and to the point. He had no patience for complications or excuses. His words were a call to action. True faith for James is not something that is just spoken or declared, but something that is lived. One of the most famous verses from James is, "Faith without works is dead." James 2, verse 26. This verse has resonated throughout time and still serves as a powerful reminder that true faith requires action. James wasn't interested in empty or superficial faith. He calls us to act on our faith, to care for the needy, control our tongues, and live with an unwavering faith that is seen in our daily actions. He was a living example of this faith in action. James' letter also addresses themes such as divine wisdom, temptation, patience, and fervent prayer. He doesn't just instruct, but challenges us to live a life that honors God in all areas. His words continue to be a practical guide for Christians around the world, teaching us that true faith is not theoretical, but practical and experiential. But not everyone was happy with James' growing power and influence. His steadfast faith and the following he gathered drew the anger of the religious leaders of Jerusalem. James became a stumbling block for those who wanted to maintain control over Jewish faith and traditional culture. At a time of great tension, James was taken to the top of the temple and challenged to deny his faith in Jesus. He could have given in to the pressure, could have conformed, but James stood firm. He refused to deny his Lord. Furious at his courage, his enemies pushed him off the top of the temple. Despite the fall, James survived, but his enemies didn't give up. They stoned him to death, making him one of the greatest martyrs in history. James wasn't just a leader or writer, but also an example of courage. Even as death approached, he remained faithful. And in his final moments, even in the face of so much pain, he prayed for his aggressors, showing the depth of grace he had experienced in Christ. James leaves a lasting legacy. His life reflects a radical transformation that is possible when someone fully surrenders to God. He started as a skeptic, but now his life is remembered as one of the greatest stories of faith and devotion the Christian faith has ever seen. His wisdom and practical faith continue to guide Christians today, especially through his letter in the Bible. What can we learn from James' life? True faith is not passive, but active. It's not enough to believe. We must act according to what we believe. James shows us that true faith is manifested in action, in courage in the face of adversity, and in love for others. He also teaches us to stand firm, even when challenged and attacked. James challenges us to be like him, to live our faith with action, to act with wisdom, and persevere to the end, knowing that faith that is not tested is not true. He is an example of how faith can transform lives, and how the truth of Christ can lead us to be leaders of change in the world. James' life is a testimony of transformation. He shows us that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. If a skeptic like James can become an unwavering leader of faith, then all of us can be used by God, regardless of our past. James teaches us that true faith is alive and dynamic, reflected in our actions, in how we treat others, and in how we stand firm when facing challenges. It's not enough to just believe in something. We need to live according to what we believe. And finally, James challenges us to be living examples of faith, just as he was, leaving a legacy that impacted generations. Are we living our faith in a way that impacts those around us? James calls us to a life of intentionality and courage, to live our faith in a way that transforms the world around us. And what about you? Are you ready to act on your faith as James did? Let's follow James' example and live a faith that is not just spoken, but lived in action, prayer, and courage, even in adversity.